This morning we're continuing on in our series called The Light of the World and what it looks like for Christ's love and light to come into this earth as it did that Christmas season. Before I dive into the message this morning, I just have a small little card up here. I'm going to read it to you, let you know about it. Maybe it's something that you'd be interested in. I have heard Pastor Ray and some of the other pastors in the area were talking about this. Crosspoint Trinity Church, which is a Wesleyan church up on the north side. It's on Boonville Highway and 69. Has a live nativity that is supposed to be really nice that's happening next weekend from 7 to 9, I believe. Now I got to pick it up. From 7 to 9 next Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So if that's something that you're interested in, let you know that that is something that you may want to enjoy some family time. Go ride there, see that, and maybe enjoy some other Christmas lights in this season. This Christmas, we've been talking about the light of the world. We've been talking about, those words are there. But anyway, we've been talking about what it looks like in the light of this world and what it looked like when Jesus came as light into this world and how that light is to speak to us and what this symbolism looks like for us in this passage and in this place. Last week we talked about how the prophets foretold of the light and the coming of Christ's birth. And we used two scriptures specifically that we looked at in these passages, and we looked at what these would look like for us. And the first one was this. Isaiah 9:2 says that the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. The great light that was spoken of in this passage was speaking about the light of Jesus, was speaking about the fact that Jesus was coming as a light into the world to penetrate the darkness, and the birth of Jesus that we celebrate this Christmas is that light. Is that light that has changed and is still shining for us 2,000 years later. This morning we're going to go back specifically and look at the birth of Jesus and look at this coming light and look at how it impacted other people in the story. How in just these moments in time frame that Jesus was born, how did this impact the story of Jesus Christ? Isaiah 60 verses 1 through 3 says this, "Arise, shine, for the light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you. See, darkness covers the earth, and thick darkness is over the peoples. But the Lord rises upon you, and his glory appears over you. Nations will come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn." So here's the key question this morning. How are you letting the light of Christ's birth impact you this Christmas season? Every 2 weeks now, just recently started, the pastors from this area, the lead pastors from this area, gather at Forest Hills Baptist Church and enjoy lunch together. And this week we were having lunch together, and Pastor Dave from the Catalyst Church down the road started talking about something that I think is very insightful, that I want you to think about and ponder this Christmas season. And he said it's something that he's boldly said to his congregation, so I'm stealing it and boldly saying it to you. And that's to identify as we celebrate Christmas, that we celebrate two Christmases. We celebrate a cultural Christmas, and we celebrate Christmas, which is Jesus' birth. And they're different. They're not the same. So I'm not here to say don't do this one and only celebrate Christ's birth. No, I want you to think for a minute about this and ponder it through this week. What is the difference between cultural Christmas and Christmas that celebrates Jesus' birth? Cultural Christmas, obviously, we're quick to say has to do with Santa Claus and has to do with the traditions that rise around that. But what about Christmas trees? What about presents? What about Christmas lights? What about shopping and all the chaos and the parties? That's cultural Christmas. There's not necessarily a lot to do with celebrating Jesus' birth in those celebrations. Again, I'm not telling you to stop them. I'm telling you to acknowledge them, that the two are not one. Because we think we do all these things for Christmas and we're celebrating Jesus' birth, and we're not. We're not doing that. We're allowing cultural Christmas to drown out spiritual Christmas, to drown out Christmas, which is celebrating Jesus. So I want you to think about that. I want you to begin to ponder that in your heart and in your mind to go, okay, I think that's accurate. And then begin to separate and look at, okay, how am I being intentional about celebrating Jesus' birth? What am I doing to be intentional about worshiping Jesus this Christmas? And so I hope as we unpack this series and as we go through next week and we have the Christmas program and as we celebrate Christmas Eve together twice this year, that you'll think about these things and it won't be a secondhand thought at the end to go, oh yeah, before we open presents, let's read the Christmas story. That we'll be a little bit more intentional about our worship of Jesus and celebrating the coming of the King this Christmas. So most everyone in this room is familiar with the Christmas story. We can look at a nativity. Now this is a basic nativity with just Joseph and Mary and a baby. But if there were shepherds here and if there were wise men here, each one of us could tell you what those mean and who the shepherds were and a little bit about the wise men and why the wise men are in this story. And the fact that Jesus was born in this stable scenario, this place where the animals were lived and where there were fields out and around them. I've had the opportunity to go to Israel and see there's caves in the hill that they really believe is more likely the place that Jesus was born. And in this cave, it was a place where the animals would find shelter. And they would be over the fields, and it would be places where the animals and the shepherds would find shelter that Jesus was born. And it's insightful to see and understand that. So we understand this part of the story. And like I said, most of us can talk about it. And last week we talked about the shepherds a little bit more specifically. We talked about that moment of light that the shepherds received, right? We talked about that moment where all of a sudden in the darkness and in the low of the night, an angel burst out and the light had shone bright. And the angel gave an announcement of the birth of Jesus Christ. And then this heavenly choir sang. The choir concert that has never been duplicated in all history. The Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir couldn't touch this choir that sang for the shepherds that night. And so this week we're going to step a little bit further into the story, and we're going to see what happens next after the shepherds had heard, and then we're going to talk for just a moment about the wise men. When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby lying in a manger. And when they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told to them about this child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary treasured all these things and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. So after seeing this concert, after seeing this light, the shepherds knew in an instant what they were supposed to do to respond. The angel told them, "Go into Bethlehem. This is what you're going to see. This is what you're going to experience. Go and see it, because the Savior has been born." And so they went and they saw and they observed, and just as the angel had said, it was there. And they knew God had spoken to them. They knew that God had called them to respond, and they did. And they saw these things just as they were told. And you know what? The townspeople, the people around, believed those shepherds. They could tell, there was no doubt they were making up these stories. There was no doubt that this story was real, and they were not making up these stories. They knew these stories were true. And it says, and Mary pondered them in her heart. Here Mary is. She's given birth to Jesus. She's holding the baby, wondering if anybody even knows and understands. And then these shepherds come in full of excitement, ready to celebrate. And they tell this story to Mary of these angels and the songs and the announcement. And Mary just must have had this grin on her face, as the scripture says, and she pondered these things and held them in her heart. She knew. And any doubt she had was confirmed by those shepherds as they came in and declared what God had done for them. When the shepherds experienced this unexpected God moment, telling people about it was easy. It was simple. It was obvious that this is what they need to do. Think about that in your life. When are those moments in your life when God came through in ways that you didn't expect it? When God came through in moments and places where you knew it was God, and as soon as you knew it was God and you'd experienced it, you had to tell people. Maybe it was through a healing that God had done in your heart and in your body. Maybe it was in the middle of a difficult situation. You're stranded on the side of the road with a broken down car and you feel like there's nobody around, and all of a sudden somebody comes up with exact answers you needed to get you back going again and to get the problem solved and fixed. And you knew in that moment that it was God. Or maybe it was in the middle of relationships and with family or friends that were deeply broken. Things were said that were hurtful, and you thought the situation could not be amended. But God stepped in and brought a healing that you know, and everybody involved in that situation knew that it was only a healing that God could bring. And you shared that story. And you told people that knew that this hopeless situation was infused with hope only because of what God did. You see, God had the opportunity to announce the birth of his son, and to think that instead of using somebody with influence or money or a person who wrote the newspaper or whatever it was, God didn't choose those people to tell the story. God didn't choose somebody with power. God went to the bottom of the socioeconomical scale to share the story, to tell them about the birth of Jesus and let them be the ones that share the announcement of the birth of Jesus. And it was powerful to see God use them. And the fact that people listened and responded and also believed that Jesus had been born. So now we're going to move forward to the other group of people that were impacted by the Christmas story. These people were the wise men. So I'm going to read to you Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. We're going to go all the way through this, but we're going to break it up a little bit. Starting in verse 1, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all of the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them, where the Messiah was to be born? In Bethlehem and in Judea, they replied. So for the wise men, it was a little bit of a different story. The wise men took a long journey to find Jesus. So here we have these wise men, these magi that come far off from the east. It's believed that they had come from the land of Parthia, which was not too far from Babylon, which today would be in the area of Iraq. So these men had come from far off to worship. Now this story, as you probably know, didn't happen right away. It'll say in the next passage that, in one of the next passages that we read, that they entered the house where Mary was with the boy. So it didn't happen right after the shepherds left. The wise men showed up and gave their gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But it's a part of the story of the celebration of the birth of Jesus because these wise men had come from afar. Who were these wise men? There's a lot of questions that can be asked of who they were. Some sort of dream interpreters, some sort of astronomers that studied the stars, and they would have traveled thousands of miles to find Jesus. Some feel because it was from that Babylon type area that these wise men would have been similar to the wise men that were spoken about in Jerusalem or in Daniel, which you can go back and do a lot of study about the links of how those two things come together, but fascinating to think about those wise men fitting with those wise men and the people that even trapped Daniel into getting into the lion's den and all of those possible connections there. But let's look at the scripture here. Herod, it said Herod and all the people, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. So the wise men come in, and I don't know if they went straight to Herod or if they went to the people and said, hey, we're looking for where the king of the Jews is to be born. And rumor went around until it finally got to Herod, or if it went to Herod, and I would imagine it went to the people before it got to Herod. But it says it wasn't just Herod that was disturbed, it was all the people. There was disruption in it. Now, maybe some of the disruption was excitement because they were Jews. I don't know. Maybe they were worried. Maybe they were nervous. I don't know what that would have been for the Jewish people, but it's interesting in this passage that that's mentioned here. So Herod brings the chief priests, the teachers of the law together, and he says to them as scholars, hey, where's this king supposed to be born? Where are we going to find him? And they go, oh, well, we know. This is easy. We know the Old Testament like that. Jesus is to be born in Bethlehem. Boom. End of story. Bethlehem, the easy answer. And so they go about their business. So let's look at verses 7 and 8. Then Herod called the Magi together secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go, search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me so that I may go and worship him. So that I may go and worship him. Now, then Herod called the Magi secretly. He got rid of the teachers. He got rid of the teachers of the law and the people that gave him the answer at Bethlehem and said, okay, thanks, we appreciate the answer. Okay, guys, come here. Let's have a little talk. So how'd you guys find out about this star? When did it happen? Where are you guys from? How far did you travel? You know, these questions are coming out of Herod. Now, I don't think, I have a feeling there was a little bit of acting going on. I'm just speculating a little bit that Herod was acting a little bit. That he was going, putting his hand on their shoulders, respecting them and honoring them and talking to them about who they were. And, oh, this is cool. I'm excited. Hey, guys, go, and when you find that baby, you come back and tell me, because I want to worship him. I want to worship him. Oh, you guys go ahead. Man, you guys are great. Go, kid, continue on this journey. Pats him on the back. They leave and shuts the door. Herod goes, oh, I got to find this guy. This has got me worried. And instantly, the nervousness comes over Herod. You see, Herod was a popular king of the Jews. He was a Roman, but he was a king. He was a king that rebuilt the temple. The Jews loved him. He had good standing for the most part, this Herod did, with the Jews. So any king that was going to rise up, that was going to be a Jewish king, was going to cause him a big problem. Was going to take away his authority and his power. And he was a man that had an ego and wanted the authority and the power. So he became nervous about these things. And so you see him behind the scenes manipulating things in his worry. But I would argue probably putting up a good front in front of the Magi, telling them that he was excited and wanted to worship them. Wanted to worship this king with them, to send them on their way that they may find him so that everybody can worship together. The other thing that I want to take note of is the fact that the religious leaders were involved in a discussion. The religious leaders, because the people were disturbed, by what Herod was saying. And then the religious leaders were brought in to ask where this king was to be born, and they said Bethlehem. I do think it's interesting that they're not discussed anymore, that it's as though they didn't care either, because they didn't seem to go to Bethlehem themselves. They knew where Bethlehem was. If this was in Jerusalem, it wasn't that far away. Well, we should send some religious leaders to go find out about Jesus and where he's going to be born. They didn't do that. They didn't appear to do that anyway. They didn't seem worried. They were involved in what they were doing, and they were taking care of their religious order. They weren't really, apparently, seeking the birth of the Messiah. Because if they were, everything would have stopped, and they would have went finding and looking and searching for themselves where this Jesus was. So, continuing on in verses 9 through 12. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and they worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. You see, in this story, these wise men and these shepherds, we see them both were drawn by a light. One was a bright and shining light that would have shone bright enough that you probably would have had to turn your eyes until your eyes adjusted. The other were men from afar who knew the skies and the stars and knew something. I don't think just because of the star. I think God and possibly the Holy Spirit was involved with them following. I don't know who they were. I don't know what the outcome was. Did they become Christ followers after they had seen and experienced this? Or did their family become Christ followers after they had heard the story? And then some 40, 50 years later, when the gospel was spreading throughout the nations, and they go, oh, I remember this story of our relatives, whoever they were, over in this Babylon area, about them going and finding this king. And these Christians were now coming and telling them the story, and they got saved because of this path that the wise men had been on. But the wise men were following God in this process, even though we don't know the full outcome. These two stories had different responses because they were different situations. And you see, in life, we have these different responses and different times in our life where Jesus steps in, where Jesus comes to us, and sometimes it's right now. Sometimes it's that come to Jesus moment where you need to turn about right now, and you need to straighten something out, and you need to go to him, and you need to receive him into your heart. You need to receive the forgiveness. You need to receive the healing. You need to receive whatever it is he's offering, and it's right now. And then there's other times God takes us on a journey, right? There's other times where we're walking through the lands and we experience some Jesus, and we know we're searching, and we open the Word and he shares this, and we start to go this direction. And then we run into people and we build relationships, and we hear the Word preached and taught, and we're praying, and God walks us this way and walks us that way until all of a sudden the moment comes where God calls us to change, where God calls us to make a step, maybe to follow him in ministry, maybe to turn from a sin, maybe to know who you're going to marry or what you're going to do with college, or all of these different things that could be. But there's a journey that's taken in your heart, and you understand the journey that God was with you the whole way as you were following his light. And so there's different processes that we go through as we interact and as we engage Jesus. And I think it's helpful to be aware of those. It's helpful to think about that, and to think about maybe in this moment, if it's been a while since you feel like you've had a deep interaction with Jesus, to look back and maybe recognize the journey. Maybe see the change that's been brought about. Maybe see what God is pushing you into. or calling you to and go, oh, I don't know how I got here, but if I look, I can see Jesus walking with me to this point and to this place. Some of you, Jesus has been speaking pretty hard to you the last couple weeks, last couple days, and you know there's some serious things you need to just draw a line in the sand and deal with. And your response needs to be quick, and Jesus is standing there waiting for you and wandering. So how are you going to let the light of Jesus impact you this Christmas season? How are you going to allow His truth into your life? How are you going to respond to it? Are you going to shut it off and push Him away? And continue to try to ignore it or continue to try to do your things? Or are you going to step into the light and allow Jesus to pour over you and to fill you and to satisfy you in only a way that He can do? When we're confronted with Jesus, we're confronted with two things. We're first of all, honestly, confronted with a little bit of the negative, right? Of our sin, of the places that we fall short. Those are usually a part of a confrontation or a moment where Jesus steps in and is calling us to something. The other thing that we're confronted with in those moments is the goodness of God. The fact that He is holy, the fact that He is forgiving, the fact that He is all-trusting, those two things come together. But honestly, those two things aren't always the easiest things for us to receive because Satan will try to lie to you about both. This isn't just if you're not a Christian yet or you are a Christian. Both of these people can experience this. Where God may be calling you to a change and Satan's like, it's not that serious. Don't worry about that. You're okay. You're good. You're better than these people or those people. Picture this for a minute. Picture that you're sitting in your living room. You're not the neatest, cleanest person. If you are a neat, clean person, just imagine with you. Some of you might have a hard time with this. But you're not the neatest, cleanest person, and there's darkness in the room. You've seen scenarios like this if you've been in different places in life. And there's food around that living room, and there's dishes that's left out, and the TV's on. But whether it's light, whether it's day or night, it doesn't matter because you keep the shades closed. You keep it dark. And Jesus walks in the front door of your room, and He flips the lights on bright. Got one of them big new garage lights that they make at Home Depot in the center, and I mean, it lights up your room. And all of a sudden, you see the filth and the dust and the dirt and the dishes and all the things. And Jesus walks into that living room, and He says, hey, I am here for you. It's the things that are messy, but we're going to make some changes. Let me help you clean this up. Let's get some things straightened out. Let's begin to be truthful about who we are, about who you are, so that we can walk forward. And I am here to help you. And there's a lot of times that happens. It's happened for me. I go, thanks, Jesus. Shut the door. Nope, I don't want that touched. Nope, I got it. Because I'm embarrassed, I'm ashamed. I don't want somebody else in my mess. I can fix it myself. I can clean it up. I don't need Jesus to come clean my mess up. I know how to do dishes and dust, and I know how to act this way and look this way and be this way. I got it, Jesus. I can take care of it myself. Been raised in the church. I've been told how to act and dress and look and talk. I got it. Thanks, Jesus. Kick him out the door. Or we can let Him in. We can let His love surround us. We can be okay. There's no better place for us to reveal our weaknesses than to Jesus. There's no better place for us to admit where we fall short and where we fail than to Jesus and say, God, I'm a failure. God's not there to condemn. He's there to love and help you and become that strength and that support that you need that nobody else can give. So by letting the light of Jesus walk into your room, into your heart, into your life, and trust Him to clean it up. brings about a life change. Brings us to a place where we allow God to do things that only He can do. You see, Christ came to earth 2,000 years ago. He came as light to open man's eyes to the hope that God has promised since Genesis chapter 3. To say that He was going to bring a Savior, that He was going to reconcile God to man through the death of this baby today that we celebrate 33 years later as He dies on a cross. He's going to instill a hope in us that only He can instill. And so this Christmas, I want to challenge you to think about this light. I want to challenge you to think about Christmas, to think about cultural Christmas. Acknowledge that it's there. I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm not saying, nope, we're not going to do that anymore. Just acknowledge that there's two different things we're celebrating here. That we've got the presents and we've got the Christmas trees, we've got the Christmas lights, but then we have Jesus. And I think in this culture as the church, it's important for us to realize that if we acknowledge them separately, we can get into this Christmas with Jesus a little bit better. We can acknowledge that, okay, let's step away from that for a moment, and let's spend some time worshiping Jesus and acknowledging the light that we need to have in our life, put on our heart, so that He can bring about the change He's calling you to this Christmas. So that we can receive Him in the core and in the depths of our heart. So begin asking yourself, with the help of your family, with the help of the Holy Spirit, how can you celebrate a Christian Christmas this season? What can you do different to step away from culture for a minute to celebrate Jesus? It might be weird, it might be different, it might be uncomfortable. If we can be honest for a minute, what He might ask us to do. How can we serve and love other people that maybe aren't our family this Christmas to show Jesus' light in our community? How can we build relationships or share with people far from God love and goodness and hope that Jesus offers us? You see, the way I see it is I see it as an act of worship. I see it as us acknowledging the baby that was born, celebrating His birth, and saying, God, how can we worship You this Christmas? We think of worship by lifting our hands and singing a song, and that's worship. No, that's not worship. Worship is a moment of surrender. Worship is a moment of putting what you're doing into His hands and surrendering it to Him and saying, God, I'm going to do this because I love You and I want to show my love for You. How can you reflect His light as a way of worshiping this Christmas? You are not perfect. I am not perfect. And if we understand it, we're far from being perfect. But let's not settle there this Christmas. Let's not take this season and just go, yeah, I know I'm broken. I know I'm not perfect. I know I fall short. God, I worship You. Thank You for loving me despite that. But let's change that thought and say, okay, in this moment of acknowledging that we fall short, we open our heart up to God and say, all right, God, but I know You want more. I know that You can do more. I know that You can change me and create me to be the person You've called me to be. Despite my brokenness, use me. Despite my brokenness, heal me. Forgive me. And help me to turn from those things. And watch Jesus do His work this Christmas season. Watch that light in your life turn on. And God work through the brokenness and the dirtiness and the dust to bring you to a place of peace that doesn't make sense. Healing in the midst of difficulty. Hope in the midst of hopelessness. That's what Jesus wants to offer. That's what He wanted to offer 2,000 years ago. And that's the same thing he wants to offer us today. And until he returns, that is a message that we need to continue to speak, to share with everybody that we know. But it's hard to do until we let that light really speak into our life and to allow it to become alive. Because I've been in ups and downs in my walk with Christ. There's times the light's pretty dim. It's hard to share with other people. Open yourself up for that light to be set aflame so that God can do his work in your life and the people around you. Would you stand with us? Worship team's going to come, and we're going to prepare to sing a closing song.